Hello, everyone. This is Jeffrey Kerr. I'm here today with a very special guest. He's a TV producer, writer, and psychotherapist who helps writers and stars with self fulfillment. He has written for 30 TV shows and has movies out. He recently co wrote a book called How to Be a Rockstar Screenwriter. It has chapters on procrastination, perfectionism, social anxiety, and highly sensitive persons. Please welcome David Silverman.
Hi there.
Hey, and I should add that you're not the David Silverman who's directed countless episodes of The Simpsons. That's a completely different artist with the same name.
Yeah, so it's a funny story about him. So we were both working at Fox at the same time, the same studio. We both worked on the lot there. I would start getting checks for David Silverman for The Simpsons. I got his checks, and they were ran about $15,000 each for directing. He's a director. Anyway, so I sent them back to Fox, and I said, "You have the wrong David Silverman." And then they kept sending them to me again, like just I couldn't get rid of those checks. And so
Oh,
after a while, I finally contacted him, gave him his paychecks.
almost reminds me of a story Bill Murray once told of how he signed on to the live action Garfield movie. He saw the script was co-written by Joel Coen and assumed it was of the Coen brothers, but turns out it wasn't.
Right.
To start things off, would you mind telling us about your book?
Yes. So yeah, the book is it's called How to Be a Rockstar Screenwriter. It's a perfect book for any aspiring writers out there who want to get into TV or movies. And it kind of breaks down how to get an agent, how to get a manager, how to break in, what kind of day jobs would be good while you're starting out. Yeah, whether you want to go to film school or not, or write with a partner or not, all these decisions that you have to make. It gives you ideas even about what kind of scripts sell and how to create a log line and get all this information to the studios and how to do it too. There's a lot of information about how to get in touch with a producer who, let's say you write science fiction or something and you find a producer who likes to make those movies. There's a way to find that guy, that producer, and send him the script. It's just what he's looking for. So tons of useful information in there for anybody who wants to be a writer in Hollywood.
And what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story also. I worked in TV for, 30 years or so, and then I started thinking about becoming a psychotherapist because that was what I set out to do when I went to college. I went to Stanford University. They had a great psychology department. So I studied psychology there, and I thought I was going to be a psychotherapist, but I got sidetracked and did all this Hollywood stuff. At that point, I decided I was going to try to work with clients who were in the business. And I started working with, writers have lots of problems. They're very susceptible. They sit alone in an office all day, typing in a computer, and they're very isolated. And there's lots of ups and downs in show business. Writers specifically, but even directors and actors. The business is very tricky and challenging. So I decided to focus on those people who do need help. So I started writing blogs on there's a big website called Psych Central, and I had a column there called Hollywood Therapy. And so every week I wrote a 2-page blog for that. I found that I ended up with 65 blogs like that, and they all seemed like they would be good chapters in a book. So that's how I ended up writing the book. And it has, mainly I wanted to pass on this knowledge about how to succeed in these businesses.
Yeah, I was planning to ask, how in addition to your writing producing career, you've also been a psychotherapist for screenwriters, actors, and directors. What's it like for you to help them out?
Yeah, it's very fulfilling. A lot of people, since they've never been through it, they're looking for answers. Like there's a lot of like myths in Hollywood, and a lot of people don't understand the way Hollywood works. Most people probably think that writers, they start out and they write one script and they get an agent and sell it. It's never that simple. Your first script usually doesn't get made. But a lot of writers think that's the case, and that leads to a lot of them giving up after their first script doesn't sell. But I researched this, and it turns out even the biggest screenwriters, the most famous ones, they probably had to write between 3 and 8 screenplays before they got good enough.
Yeah, it's almost like, how you train for sports, you're not gonna knock it out of the park the first time out. No, you need time to really develop your muscles.
Yeah, and there's a process to it, which I brought my psychotherapy training to the process of how to become a better writer. And it involves seeking advice from produced writers like myself, or there's people in Hollywood who charge for advice, which is, I think it's worth it. There's a guy named Eric Bork who wrote the Band of Brothers HBO show, and he has a service for $500 to read your screenplay and give you advice on it. It's more than just getting like his opinion. He will help you with what's wrong and how to fix it. And that's the only way you really grow as a screenwriter, is to learn from people who've been through the mill, and they know what to do, and they know how to fix a weak script, or the changes you need to make in act one to make act three pay off, and things like that, things that only years of experience really will prepare you for. So I have a service like that too, and I read a script and give feedback on it, and if you're a comedy writer, I suggest you find another comedy writer with previous credits and learn from him. And if you're a science fiction writer or something, find the guys that have that experience and learn from them. And even if you're not dealing with famous writers, let's say you're in a writing class and there's one guy that seems to be a head and shoulders above the rest of the class. Maybe he's got an agent already. He's that guy, the guy who looks like he's going to succeed. Ask him to read your script and help you out with it. Learn from the better writers. That's the idea. There's a whole chapter on I call it the Zen of screenwriting growth. The Zen of it has to do with the fact you're going to know when you're sitting down to write your first script, it's probably not going to sell. But that's kind of demoralizing. So in your mind, you have to think that it is going to sell and write it as if. So it's a kind of mental Jedi mind trick that you have to play with yourself. And if it doesn't sell, it's not the end of the world. There's lots of good outcomes that can happen, even if your script doesn't sell. For example, your script can be a calling card script, and it's the kind of script, it's your best work, and you put it out there, and it might get you an agent, which is a positive outcome. And it might get you a meeting with a producer, and they might want to hear about other script ideas that you have. So just because your first script doesn't sell, and which is almost 100% guaranteed, it doesn't mean you're wasting your time. So you have to kind of get into the mindset of writing it like it's going to sell, except knowing that it's probably not. I have a whole chapter on that.
And what do you hope readers end up taking away from the book?
Well, I hope they can use the advice to start selling screenplays. That's primarily why I wrote it. There's tons of writers out there who have written maybe 5 or 6 screenplays, and they're just not sure what to do next. I've broken it down for them, the next few steps to take. I recommend people get into television, because that's what I did for most of my career, and I really loved it. And there's a different way in for TV. So I outline what the steps are. For example, in television, they want you to write a pilot episode, which is the first episode in the series, and they want you to write that as an example of what you can do. They want to look for certain things like, does it feel like this TV show could go 5 years? Does it feel like the characters are driven enough or have goals and that sort of thing? Is there enough relationship stuff happening so that these two characters will fall in love and break up and find somebody else? They just want to know that it'll go 5 years. 5 years is kind of a magic number in TV. It's 100 episodes, at least in the old-fashioned TV series, 20 episodes a year, roughly. Once you get to the magic number of 100, then you can syndicate the show, which means you're going to put it in syndication. It'll run on Channel 13 like MASH does, or, Big Bang Theory. And most good shows, Roseanne, they end up in syndication, and that's where the big money is. That's what studios and networks are looking for in a TV series.
And going back to the beginning, how did you first get started in screenwriting?
Yeah, so like I said, I went to Stanford to study psychology, and I ended up in a writing class there. It was really more like short stories, but it was really interesting to me, and I kind of had an interest in comedy. When I was a kid, like my brother and I would make funny commercials, tape record them, and we send it to our local radio station. There's a show called Loman and Barkley. It was a drive time radio show, and these guys, Loman and Barkley, were really funny. They had a contest, Loman and Barkley Lemonade. So my brother and I made a little commercial with sound effects and everything. And they liked it so much, they asked us to come into the studio and we redid it on studio equipment. So that kind of got me interested in doing comedy and trying to think of it as a career, you know. And then after Stanford, I went to USC Film School, and that's where I started to learn about screenwriting.
And for a while, your most frequent writing partner was the late Steven Su. How do you pronounce his last name?
So Starsick, right?
Yeah, Steven Susarstick. How did the two of you meet?
Yeah, so that was one of the best things that happened to me at USC. Most of the other guys in the film department there were interested in being like the next George Lucas or the next Francis Coppola. You know, they had their sights on Academy Award winning dramatic films, you know. And my friend, a guy named Will Lowry, we were in a lot of the same classes together. And he said, "Hey, there's another guy who wants to write comedy." And he knew that I wanted to write comedy. So I met him, and it turned out that he was a really good partner. He was a little bit ahead of me in that department. He'd already sent a few scripts to some producers like on Mork and Mindy, and they liked them. But after the two of us started writing together, then they said, "Well, we really like these scripts. Why don't you come in and pitch the show?" So that was our first experience pitching on Mork and Mindy, which was like a #1 show at the time. And we had no experience going into that, going on a studio lot and pitching to producers. That was our first experience.
Yeah, and some of your earliest credits include several classic sitcoms such as The Jeffersons, One Day at a Time, Alice, Newhart, and ALF. What was it like getting to work on those shows?
Yeah, those were fun shows. I especially liked Alf. I had a lot of fun on the set. You know, Alf was a puppet, so we didn't shoot it in front of a live audience because there was a lot of like they built a special set where the floor was like way up here. So the guy operating the puppet could like march the Alf puppet around the set like he was walking and talking, so he could stand up and do it at the same time. But it was unusual in that respect. We didn't have an audience, but they shot it like a film instead. It wasn't three camera. But that was very different from like the Jeffersons, for example, which was shot in front of a live audience. That was a lot of fun too. I remember our first episode, George, Lionel was his son, and they had a daughter. George thought that the daughter would belong on this baby calendar that people were producing because they were so proud of her. His wife said, "No, we don't want to do that." You know, George, Wheezy, George's wife, said, don't do that." George was the kind of character that would just go ahead and do it. He goes to, takes the baby, puts her in a stroller, goes down there. They do the pictures, and they come back with the wrong baby, and he's a Chinese baby. So you know some of the writers there just they called that episode the Wong baby episode. But that was fun in front of a live audience. That really the audience went crazy over that one. Such a great experience.
Yeah, it's interesting how you say it was fun for you to work on Elf because from what I've read, a lot of the actors really hated working on that show, mainly because how difficult it was working alongside a puppet and such. I mean, I guess what was your take on that?
Well, we didn't have any problems with the puppet, but there was an actor on that show. I think he was a little off. Anyway, he's a very good actor. When he had a problem with some jokes, sometimes you hear actors say, "I wouldn't say that to this character." I mean, anyway, this actor was like, "I wouldn't say that to Alf." You know, it's not what our relationship's all about. And he's talking about this puppet. I think they tried to change the line to make him happy, but eventually he locked himself in his dressing room. This is a grown man, you know, in his 50s, I guess, maybe 30s. Yeah, he locked himself, and we had to shut down the studio, and we couldn't film anything that day. It cost a lot of money because you have gaffers, electricians, camera people. They're all on the clock, right? And we're all paying them to stand around and do nothing. Anyway, so a whole day went by, and he didn't shoot, and we didn't shoot anything. So, you know, you have temperamental actors. That was one of the issues on that show. You know, the next day we came into the office and he had sent a box of Dom Perignon for, a bottle for everybody to make up for it. So that was the upside of that. But very unusual. Yeah, I've had temperamental actors on other shows, but that was the worst, worst case.
And on these shows you got to write for, you wrote for TV icons like Norman Lear, Linda Lavin, and Bob Newhart. All of them have passed away in recent years. What were each of them
Sure.
like to work with?
Yeah, so well, Linda was I really liked working for her. That was on Alice, the TV show Alice, which, the guy Mel is the short order cook, and the waitress who has two best friends like Flo and yeah, her other best friends. Yeah, that was a fun show to work on because the producers, Bob Carroll and Madeline Davis Jr., worked with Lucille Ball. They wrote almost all the I Love Lucy episodes. So it was fun working with them. And through them, we got to meet Lucy at one of their parties. That was fun. When we went over to Madeline's house for parties, she would have all these, like Colonel Clank from Hogan's Heroes would be at the party, and we could talk to him, and Steve Allen, Edie Gourmet, people like that. So that was like a real thrill, was to be able to talk to people like that because of Bob Carroll and Madeline Davis. But Linda was really sweet, very talented lady. I think she won a Tony for a part in a Neil Simon play that came later. Yeah, she was really nice to us, my partner Steve and I. It was just a great show to work on. There were a lot of fun people there. So that was Linda, very easy to get along with. Newhart, also a real pro, you could give him material and he'd make it work, a lot of actors. I've had actors that constantly want to change the lines, so we're working really hard back in the writer's room trying to come up with the best jokes we can and that sort of thing. Occasionally you get an actor and he just wants to ad lib lines because he always thinks he's coming up with better ideas. Sometimes you have to try and coax them, try to get them to say the line. And sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes they never agree. So you have to, kind of wing it. Yeah, the Newhart was easy. Linda was easy. Yeah, Sherman Hemsley on the Jeffersons. He was a pro. Yeah, it's very sad to see them pass away, especially Linda and Bob Newhart recently. Very sad to see that.
Well, yeah, as well as Norman Lear.
Yeah, Norman Lear too. Yeah, we didn't see him that much, but we did work on One Day at a Time, which was a Norman Lear show. Valerie Bertinelli was on that show, and Mackenzie Phillips. It was a fun show to work on. Barbara was dating Eddie Van Halen at the time, so he would come to the rehearsals and things. It was kind of fun to see him. I think he was only about 17 years old when he was hanging around with her, but he always had a beer in his hand, even though he was underage. But yeah, it was really a lot of fun to work on those shows. And Norman, he was very easy, Bensfield and Grant were running the show, and he just kind of let them do what they wanted to do. So he wasn't like a stern boss who, we've had those too. We've had some bosses who are really difficult.
And you're someone who's also written for animation. How did you find yourself working in that medium?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story too. So animation is a different guild than the TV sitcoms. The WGA is in control of the television sitcoms, and the Animation Guild is a separate guild. So during the strikes, we were out of work because we were striking, and so we couldn't get paid. We were looking for a way to make money during those periods. So sometimes they would last for 7, 8 months. So we found that we could write animated shows, and they really appreciated having sitcom writers come in because they usually were pretty good at jokes. So we started working. I think Winnie the Pooh was one of the first shows we worked on. That was a really good show at the time, a Disney show, and my partner won an Emmy for being on that show. And I wrote a few of those too. And then that's another thing in the book I talk about. Once you get your foot in the door with animation, a bunch of other doors will open up. And so we worked on a whole bunch of other animated shows like Beetlejuice and so many. I can't remember them all. But yeah, lots of animated shows on the Disney lot. Yeah, we worked with some really talented people. And then eventually we ended up writing some adult animated shows like Dilbert. Dilbert was based on the cartoon strip that Scott Adams used to draw in the Sunday comics, and a very clever strip about engineers working together. And that was a fun show to write. Also because the people that did the voices were really good. I remember Jerry Seinfeld was on that show. Yeah, the cast of Seinfeld came in to do voices. Yeah, it was just a lot of fun. A lot of fun to work on. Although our boss on that show was kind of a tyrant.
And what would you say are the biggest differences between writing for both live action and animation?
Animation is pretty visual. That's pretty much a visual art form. At least the kinds of cartoons we were writing, they were looking for visual jokes, gags, things that you might see in Charlie Chaplin or Abbott and Costello, things like that. Yeah, very different. Sometimes you were writing for kids, and so you wanted to create gags that would appeal to children as well. But we always tried to put adult level jokes in the scripts, so regardless of what show we were on. That was a lot of fun. Beetlejuice was a lot of fun to write. We even did some sort of a show called Shaolin Showdown that had kind of ninja characters and a lot of fighting and things like that, and superpowers and mystical storylines. Yeah, you get to write for all kinds of different things. That's kind of the fun of it.
And according to your IMDb page, you provided script revisions for a couple major studio films, the first of which was the 1994 live-action Flintstones movie that Steven Spielberg produced. How did that come about for you?
We had worked with a showrunner named Brian Levant, who I think started on Mork and Mindy, and we worked on a couple of shows with him. I think he did a show called Still the Beaver, like where he was kind of a big fan of retro sitcoms, so he resurrected Leave It to Beaver with the adult version. So we wrote some episodes of that show and another show he was running called Babes. So he got a chance to direct the Flintstones movie. And he was directing movies like Beethoven and the sequels to Beethoven and sort of big, splashy, animated type kids movies. But yeah, the Flintstones was like a live action version. Yeah, he was really good. He'd gone to art school and he had a really good sense of what looked good on the screen. So he asked us to come in and rewrite the script with him. There are some other writers there too. And we went over the script and then we spent a couple of days out on the set where they were shooting where the Bedrock set was, where they had these like giant dinosaurs and the Flintstone type homes and Flintstone vehicles and things like that. And we got to work with the actors who, John Goodman played Fred and Rick Moranis played his best friend Barney. Elizabeth Perkins played Wilma, and Rosie O'Donnell played Betty. Yeah, it was a very interesting show. Elizabeth Taylor played Fred's mother-in-law. So we got to work with real Hollywood royalty. That was fun. During the filming, we were talking to Rick Moranis, who played Barney, and he had some changes on the script he wanted. And so we followed him around for about a day. That was interesting because since it was the Flintstones, they were all wearing sandals. You could see all their feet, all the bare feet, all the actors. Anyway, it turned out that Rick Moranis had 6 toes on both feet, each foot, right? So they had to make a special prosthetic to cover that up. But the set looked great. If you see the movie, they set up the quarry where Fred worked. He was on the brontosaurus crane, and they had all that stuff looked great. That was a lot of fun. And coming up with Flintstone names for everything was fun too. Like Fred takes Wilma out to dinner at the fanciest place. He goes to the Cavern on the Green is the name of the restaurant there. And they had products like Liz Claybone and Bruce Springstone and all those corny Flintstones names. That was fun to come up with those.
Back in the day, live-action adaptations of animated properties weren't as common as they've become lately. Disney has especially made a cottage industry of them within this past decade, and people who've worked in animation have admittedly been very critical about this whole trend. As someone who's worked in both mediums, where do you stand on it?
Yeah, I heard about the Snow White. I guess there are various reasons why that didn't go over well. I'm not sure if some of those reasons had to do with what some actors said about the process. I'm not sure. It's certainly more difficult to take a cartoon and do a live action version of it because you have to build, like I said, a brontosaurus crane and all these Flintstones cars and things, right? A lot of work, very expensive. Yeah, the Flintstones had a huge budget, but it also made over $300 million and still making money, I'm sure. And there was a sequel to Viva Las Vegas, I think it was called. So I'm not as critical as some of the people you're talking about. I think if it looks great and the story still works, then it's fine. Yeah, one criticism that I kind of agree with is when they remake, like they do a live action. Yeah, once you have a really great movie, like the original Snow White, and you remake it, yeah, I think you're open to making a lot of mistakes. Yeah, if there's an animated movie that turned out poorly and it wasn't that good, then I can see more reason to remake it. But yeah, it's awkward when you take a movie that's like really kind of perfect and then try to remake it, and it's never gonna stand up.
Well, as the old saying goes, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and for those who'd like to pursue a career in screenwriting, where do you think would be a good place to start?
Yes, well, it all starts with writing a script. It depends on what you feel like if you'd rather be a comedy writer, science fiction, drama, action, thrillers. But yeah, you start with a script and that becomes your calling card. That's the way it works. That's how you get every job based on a script. You want to show it around. Hopefully you get an agent or a manager based on the script, and then they can help you find work. Yeah, so that's the first step. And then getting an agent or a manager is a really a big step in the right direction. Right now, agents are harder to get. Managers are a little bit easier because managers tend to grow talent. In other words, they'll find baby writers. They call them baby writers. They're just starting out, and they'll give them input on their screenplays and their scripts, TV scripts or whatever. They're usually pretty good at helping the writer to improve their samples, which is how you get jobs, is by having a really good sample. Managers are better to have in one respect. And agents, right now, the way things are, it's a kind of a tough market for screenplays, for feature screenplays. So when I recommend people just starting out, right, something low budget horror is easier to sell than just about any other genre. Low budget thrillers, probably the next best thing. Like, you don't necessarily need a big star in a horror. If you think about horror movies, some of them, like the Friday the 13th, and there are no big stars in there, right? Even Halloween, maybe Jamie Lee Curtis was like the one. It was shot. She wasn't a big star at the time. So that's the thing about horror movies, is it's all about the script. You don't need a big name in there. You don't need to get Johnny Depp to star in it. You just need a bunch of reasonably good actors. It's much easier to sell that kind of script. So I recommend people do that. And there's a chapter in my book on how to get an agent. And there's a chapter also, if you don't have an agent, how to get your script to producers. I think we talked about it a little bit before, but you've talked about this already. IMDb, right? You're familiar with it, right?
Yeah.
There's a one called IMDb Pro. You might have that one. Yeah, it's cost about $150 a year, maybe.
Well, I mean, I'm not on IMDb Pro, but I do have an IMDb account.
Yeah, okay. So it's free, really. But the IMDb Pro is a little bit better for writers starting out because they can get contact information for just about any producer out there. So let's say you've written a low budget horror film. You just start looking up, well, who else makes those? Like the Blumhouse makes those, for example. Right now, he's the king of that. So you can find contact information for Blumhouse. So let's say you're a screenwriter, you're just starting out, you've chosen to write a low budget horror film. You don't have an agent. It'll have the name, it won't just have Blumhouse. It'll have like 6 or 7 producers who make those kind of movies. It's good. You do a little bit of research, a little homework, find out the names of those guys. And then you send them a letter with a log line in it. The book goes into exactly what a log line is, how many words it should be. It should be brief, like 35 words roughly. It talks about, this is called a query letter. There's a chapter on there, like how to write a query letter. Then it'll give you an address to send all this to. Hopefully you'll get a response saying, yeah, I'd like to read that script. You don't send the script the first time, the query letter. You just send that letter, 35-word summary, and then they ask you for the script, and that's how it works. That's how you get your first sale.
And before we go, do you have any other upcoming projects that you'd like to share with us?
Well, there's a couple things I'm working on. One is a half-hour TV sitcom called I've Still Got It, about a writer about my age, older writer. There is a form of ageism in Hollywood. Writers my age don't really have a lot of luck just breaking in anyway. If you've been in the business forever and you're my age, you might be okay. It's a TV series that I've written with a friend of mine, Jack Ferrero, another writing partner. Some other writers are involved in it. Very talented people. Russ Woody is one. A bunch of other great, great, great talented guys. That is in the hands of my agent right now. And also, how I mentioned writing low budget horror is a good way to get in. Well, I've written a low budget horror film called Scout's Honor. I talk about this in the book also. Everybody in Hollywood wants to direct, right? I want to direct. There's a lot of people, like, let's say the guy who makes commercials. He really wants to direct a movie, right? But he's doing what he gets paid for directing commercials right now. And there's editors, There's other jobs like that. Second AD is a job. Assistant director is a job. Those guys all want to direct. They're looking for a low budget project that won't cost that much for them to get their foot in the door. In any case, this editor that I'm working with now is interested in our script, Scout's Honored. It takes place all out in the desert, so there's no sets and 10 people in the movie. And it's a horror, but sort of darkly funny, low budget horror. So anyway, this guy, he's an editor. He's done a lot of big horror movies. He's looking to start. Like I say, there's a chapter on this in the book. So you want to get your script to guys like that. So anyway, he read the script and he likes it. And now he's got me doing a few rewrites on it. So Scott's Honor might be coming to a theater near year. And I've still got it. The TV sitcom about sitcom writers might be coming to the television near you.
Well, David, I thank you very much for devoting your time to this conversation. It was great getting to talk to you.
And thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
And for those who'd like to keep up with your career, where can people find you on the internet?
Okay, yeah. I have a website called HollywoodScriptWriting.com, and there'll be information about my book. The book's called How to Be a Rockstar Screenwriter. It's available on Amazon. And right now, it's actually 99 cents for the Kindle version of it. So it's on sale for anybody out there who wants to learn all these tricks about getting your first TV or movie sale. It's only 99 cents. There's no excuse not to.
Thanks again for joining me today, David. This was great.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.